This is a tobacco leaf. Yeah, it's the tobacco plant that used to grow only in North and South America. But guess what? You can find it almost everywhere now. When we say tobacco, we're talking about dried and chopped leaves from this plant. It's packed with nicotine and folks smoke it up with pipes and sticks. Interestingly, back in the day, people were chewing on it. Columbus got the lowdown on the tobacco from the Cuban natives in 1492 and he took it back to Europe. Fast forward to the 19th century and they're rolling it up in thin paper and calling it as cigarettes. A bit of time passed and by 1950, they officially dropped the bomb. Smoking is directly linked to lung cancer and heart problems. Now, here's an interesting fact for you. In the 20th century, war killed 100 million people. But you know what's crazy? Smoking killed the same number of lives during that time. And today, we're diving into one of the biggest lies we've been told for over a century. How did tobacco, especially cigarettes, wiggle their way into our lives? How did nicotine and tobacco become so common around the world with all those ads and propaganda? And what did the tobacco industry do to sell their stuff? Over 10 million cigarettes are being sold every single minute worldwide. In 2022, we've got a huge 1.1 billion smokers, plus an extra 200 million people using tobacco in different forms. You can throw dozens of reasons and proof at the word of smoking, saying it's deadly and harmful, but it's no use. For a century, those tobacco giants have been blasting people with these widespread in-your-face ads, making smoking look like a coolest thing ever. I mean, they even made it seem harmless. Philip Morris, the company behind Marlboro, decides to brand cigarettes as the epitome of manliness. So their ads feature cowboys as the main characters. Wayne McLaurin was the most famous cowboy and the face of Marlboro back in the 76. He played the rugged and manly cowboy in Marlboro ads. Fast forward 15 years, he died of lung cancer at just 51. McLaurin's story is like a textbook example of tobacco industry's playbook. These guys aren't just selling tobacco. Dry tobacco has always been dry tobacco, whether it's a century ago or now. But every time, these tobacco ads gets a facelift, getting all creative to lure more people into using cigarettes. Now, Marlboro, the cowboy advertised cigarettes, is the most expensive cigarette brand in the world, valued at $36 billion. In the US, nearly half of the people reach for Marlboro. In 1950, that's when the game changed. An English doctor by the name of Dr. Richard Dahl drops an article saying smoking increases the chance of lung cancer and heart problems. Following his article, others widely published their own research and demanded a ban or limitations on cigarette sales from the government. What's the tobacco industry's next slick move? They shift their advertisement focus to filtered cigarettes. Like these filtered cigarettes stop the tobacco bits entering your mouth and they are healthier. In 1931, the first filtered cigarettes parliament is introduced by Brown and Williamson to the US population. But Marlboro and other big tobacco companies faced a big problem. Society thought filtered cigarettes were for the ladies, and men didn't want anything to do with women's cigarettes. So, to fix this dilemma, Marlboro decided to hit up the advertising guru, Leo Burnett. Now, Leo told the tobacco companies forget about blabbering about filter structures or health benefits. Let's focus on some manly characters that society likes. Sailors, builders, war reporters, and yep, the cowboy. They'll tell everyone, puffing on filtered cigarettes is no big deal for men. And the fact the women were already smoking filtered ones has no meaning whatsoever. These ad ideas work like a charm. Now, let's talk numbers. In 2023, the tobacco industry raked in $941 billion with an estimated annual growth of 2.5%. Wrap your head around this. The biggest source of income in the tobacco industry came from selling cigarettes, alone $834 billion. If you want to know how big this number is, it's more than some countries' entire budgets, or even the cash flowing in from drug trafficking, which sits at about $650 billion. Why this comparison, you ask? Just to highlight how much alleged money tobacco companies are making off people's smoking habits. Now, why did folks smoke less back in the day? Well, in the 19th century, hand-roll smoke were a luxury. In 1880, an American inventor by the name of James Albert Bonsack made a cigarette rolling machine. The handmade process was snail-paced. Pros cranked out 4 cigarettes a minute, which wasn't enough to meet the demands in the 1870s. But Bonsack's invention churned out 200 cigarettes per minute, which amounted to 240,000 cigarettes in a 12-hour workday. This 50-fold increase in production changed the tobacco industry. You can imagine the quantity of cigarettes that flooded the market, and all tobacco companies started paying good taxes to the government. In 1880, after cigarette production was mechanized, 10 billion cigarettes hit the market. Now, 100 years later, this number reached 4.5 trillion. Fast forward to 2009 and its highest, 5.88 trillion cigarettes were being produced. But what else other than mechanization and extensive advertisement fueled this production bonanza? Let's take a look at some pictures from the First World War. Tobacco companies decided to support the soldiers by sending soldiers 10 cigars, 20 packs of cigarettes, and 2 boxes of nicotine gums, along with canned food and bread, all in the name of the stress relief and boosting morale. Soldiers were the defenders of the motherland, and society showered them with respect, so this made them perfect for advertising cigarettes. And the tobacco tycoons knew war's end, soldiers returned, and they not only kept smoking, but turned everyone around them into smokers too. By the early 2000s, only 6% of US population smoked, cut to 42% by the time war came around. Scientists call this phenomenon the tobacco and nicotine epidemic. But how did this whole thing escalate so quickly? Widespread and extensive advertisement, using everything and everyone to advertise cigarettes. Take a look at this billboard from back in 1928. There's the baseball star Tony Lazzari, and ad slogan, "For a slender figure, reach for a lucky instead of a sweet." And wait for it, the kicker at the bottom. No throat irritation, no cough. Even doctors were used for the ads, like this. 20,679 physicians says Luckies are less irritating. Now, you might think this creativity is limited to one brand. How's this? More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarettes. Nothing could stop the tobacco companies. They even robbed in kids and babies for their ads. Look at these ad slogans. Gee, Dad, you always get the best of everything, even Marlboro. Back in the day, even Santa Claus and the poetess himself, Ronald Reagan, were advertising cigarettes. When one of the three folks is puffing away and every scientist, researcher and their grandma is yelling smoking bad, it's time for the government to do something about it. So first, the government makes tobacco companies slap warning on their packs, warning about their dangers. Then, any positive opinion about the use of cigarettes was banned. And finally, they pulled the plug on all those cigarette TV and radio ads. These government bans didn't do squat. Tobacco big shots just spent a ton of money on what is called indirect ads going into movies. Take a look at the Superman movie. But the grand slam of tobacco marketing was none other than Michael Schumacher. Check out these pics. Looking at these pics, it could be said that Schumacher wasn't driving for Ferrari. He was winning first place in Formula 1 for Marlboro. The Marlboro cigarette brand sponsored Formula 1 for 14 years, dishing out $100 million annually to the Italians, and 20% of that went straight into Schumacher's pocket. This German won the world title 7 times, making him the most famous Formula 1 driver. Meanwhile, Marlboro sale went from 163 billion to 301 billion cigarettes during those 14 sponsorship years. Tobacco companies have been selling cigarettes by sidestepping laws and restrictions for over a century. They could probably keep selling those for another century without batting an eye. This man changed the game. Jeffrey Wigand. He used to be the deputy manager of the R&D department at Brown & Williamson, one of the biggest tobacco companies. Now, back in '92, after resigning from the company, he decides to drop a bomb in a historic TV interview. In this jaw-dropping interview, Jeffrey spills the tea on how these tobacco bigwigs are adding ammonia into cigarettes because it makes nicotine hit your lungs like a speed train, giving your lungs a higher dose with every puff. Basically, they're turning up their reliance level on tobacco. So, after the whistleblow, all hell breaks loose. People start suing tobacco companies left and right for payback. Take Mrs. Milo Williams for instance. She throws a lawsuit at Philip Morris, blaming them for her husband's lung cancer eventual death. Why? Cause the poor guy fell for those cigarettes ads till his last day, thinking smoking had no dangers. The real kicker for these tobacco giants wasn't just about the money these folks were asking for. It's the fact that these lawsuits and court dramas were making people seriously ticked off and were badly hurting the image and reputation of the companies. So the people were putting the squeeze on the government, like the government isn't doing anything and is basically letting the tobacco company get away with murdering people and raking in billions in income. The government was sly as ever. It was playing a long time. They cranked up the pressure on the tobacco bigwigs slowly, all while waiting for people to start suing because they wanted a slice of that sweet compensation pie. As an example, Mrs. Williams scored $155 million from Philip Morris, but the government took $99 million of that money. So she was left with $56 million. Pals, smoking is no joke. It's seriously bad news and quitting is no walk in the park. This video material intends to show you how the advertising game works globally and how they push harmful stuff like cigarettes. Bottom line, smoke as little as possible, especially around kiddos. They pick up everything they see you, grown-ups, do and repeat it behind your backs.